It's nice to see you. Tonight I am doing a little tarot chart on reversed meanings for the minor arcana. This is by request, and doing so in pen is also by request. So I hope you enjoy it. This is going to be a chart not only to give you the meanings or an idea of the meanings for each minor arcana in its reversed position, but also to try to do so in a way that's easy to remember or to memorize, to give you a overall framework for understanding the cards. So we're just trying to identify patterns here. It's not going to be perfect, but through that, I think it's a good way to start, because you can build this kind of net or web of meaning where, we're comparing all the cards in a suit. We're comparing all the numbers, like numbers across suit, like the Four of Cups, the Four of Wands, the Four of Swords, etc. And I think that's a really good scaffolding to have to then add to as you build your relationship with the deck and understanding of each card. So let me say too, if you don't want to read with reversals, I really don't think you need to, but I know a lot of people want to, and it feels more complete when they are able to for them. So I support that. Generally, I'll say too, is one last thing before we begin, that I think of reversals not as the opposite of something, but the lack of something, the lack of the upright meaning. So if we think of the Three of Cups, that, it's that beautiful card with three friends and linking arms, dancing in Rider Waite. It means friendship, it means celebration. The reversed meaning doesn't mean like enemies and, like a funereal service. It means lack of those things. So it might mean isolation, for example. Or the Three of Pentacles, which is a card of collaboration. Lack of that might be like, like lack of teamwork, say, in its reversal. Another way to think of it is if upright is energy coming in, you can think of it as the reversal is that same energy receding. So, with all of this, take what is helpful to you, leave the rest, whatever works for you in this chart, take it, modify what you want. It's all a work in progress, even for me, and even as I've used these charts I made for myself, over the years, they're always being adjusted and refined. So I encourage you to do that for yourself as well. Alright, so just getting started, we're going to title this Reversed Minor Arcana Meanings. A little star because I feel like it. Alright, so here I'm going to, because we're doing this based on patterns, I'm going to give an overview of the suits, even though you might already know it. So we will just say, here we have the Wands, which is fire, and this is a creative suit. Creative or spiritual, you can put whichever resonates more with you. We have Cups as well, which is water, and that is an emotional suit, dealing with things of the emotions. Here we have Swords, which is air, like this. And that's the suit of like thoughts and ideas, just intellectual things, generally speaking. And Pentacles here. It's going to be a little tight. And that is Earth, which is a physical suit. Alright, if it's a little wonky, that's in part because I'm watching a million things right now to make sure the audio's good and that this looks fairly pretty, but also that the camera, you know, the battery's not running out, whatever. But we will get there. So I'm going to write each card for all the suits down this way, and then I'll give you the meaning. So we're going to do ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, page, knight, queen, and finally king. So these are the cards traditionally, but sometimes these cards in particular can be different. Like I've heard people have decks with princes and princesses and things like that, but this is what it is in the Rider-Waite deck traditionally, but you can change it according to whatever deck you use. So, alright, I'm going to talk you through each one, but basically you can think of it as whatever meaning we assign here, applying the overarching meaning of the suit in question. And yeah, or you can take the upright meaning if you know the card well and just think of the lack of that. So for ace, for example, we're going to put missed opportunity. So this is a unifying way to think of the cards, the Ace of Wands, Ace of Cups, Ace of Swords, Ace of Pentacles in their reversed state. So, for example, Ace of Wands is a creative suit, so maybe a missed opportunity here is a creative block, you know. For Cups, maybe the missed opportunity is not being in touch with your feelings. For Swords, I think missed opportunity, you know, Swords is intellectual, it's communication, so miscommunication is how I would interpret it. There are many meanings, of course, and it's quite expansive and extensive when you really get into it, but we are building a framework here. So Ace of Pentacles, on the other hand, you know, physical, missed opportunity, so that's financial, home, body, so maybe like a bad investment or stinginess, like a missed opportunity. You either put money in the wrong place, you didn't put money anywhere. So there's different ways to kind of open up and pick apart these formulas and patterns we're building here. For 2, I'll put disorder. So disorder creatively, probably over emotional or general lack of harmony. 2, emotional, I would say over analyzing, perhaps getting stuck in your head. Disorder intellectually, I would say information overload. Disorder physically, I would say maybe you're overwhelmed, overcommitted, too many obligations, too many commitments. For 3, we're going to put restriction. So let me say too, these kind of mimic the ace. Like the ace is generally, okay, all aces in their upright positions, I would say represent new beginnings, right? So lack of new beginning, missed opportunity. 2, generally they tend to be about balance. Lack of balance, disorder. 3, uprights tend to be cards of progress, So what's the opposite, or not the opposite, but the lack of that? Restriction. So if you can kind of see how this webs out, you'll start to build meaning and see the cards in relationship to one another. Restriction, creatively, a lack of creative progress, lack of creative focus. Emotionally, maybe isolation, imbalanced social life. Restriction, intellectually, I would say, Three of Swords, it's the three swords through the heart. So that's heartbreak. And I would say the lack of that is healing, or the lack of that could be repression of the heartbreak. So it's not always positive if the other is negative. Restriction of Pentacles, as we discussed, we have the cathedral with the architect and the stonemasons kind of collaborating on it. Lack of that would be no teamwork, no motivation, physical restriction, like no help, essentially. 4, we're going to put surge, kind of like abundance, but I think surge captures it better. So this is lack of upright force, are maybe cards of stagnation sometimes, or just general security. In the case of the 4 of Wands, it's a welcoming card, right? Like a return home. But it's still a card of stability and kind of stasis in that way. So we're going to go with surge versus stagnation. Stagnation being the upright meaning. So, surge creatively. Okay, this one, there are some that fall outside of these patterns, and this is one of those cards. Usually the cards that fall outside of these patterns are going to be in swords, especially when we get higher up. And in total, they're like 5, right? So not that many, given that there are, 14 cards for each suit, 4 suits. There are maybe 5 cards that fall outside of this schematic. I think one of those, many of them are swords, and then there's one in wands, which is the 4 of Wands, where we have the wands kind of leading us home, a homecoming. So if you think of that card, the lack of a homecoming is lack of community, leaving home, maybe a canceled celebration. So you want to maybe, if you're breaking these down, draw asterisks next to the 4 of Wands for reversed, because it kind of falls outside of this. But if you just look at the card and think lack of this, you got it. As for 4 of Cups, right? So a surge emotionally, we're going to say happiness, clarity, and then a surge intellectually. It could be recovery, it could be awakening, it could also be burnout. If we think of the 4 of Swords, it is, that person in repose, essentially, and we don't have that repose, so maybe burnout. Or awakening also works there, right? Physically with Pentacles, maybe generosity, surge of generosity, or surge of spending, so reckless spending. That's what I would say. For 5, we're going to put reconciliation, as opposed to the upright meaning, which is maybe across the board, like something like struggle. So reconciliation creatively, we'll say cooperation. It could also, they're not always positive, right? Like cooperation can be positive, could be negative, you're avoiding conflict, something to keep in mind. Reconciliation emotionally, finding peace, moving on. Intellectually, maybe it's compromise. Physically, reconciliation, maybe like there was financial loss, but now it's recovered. So 6, we're going to put avoidance. Avoidance versus the upright. Across the board is maybe something like adjustment. So avoidance, creatively. The card is of this guy coming home triumphantly, like all this fanfare on his horse, right? So maybe a lack of recognition. A lot of the card, this creative spiritual card, is like cards of being in their upright positions, of being seen for your efforts and your work or by your community. So I would say like lack of recognition, working in the shadows, something like that. Avoidance emotionally, maybe like living in the past. Intellectually, running away from your problems, don't want to deal with it, don't want to parse the issue. Physically, avoidance, unpaid debts, right? So you can see how for the majority of these cards it kind of comes together. All right, so 7, I'm going to put second guessing as opposed to the upright, which might be something like discovery. So second guessing creatively for wands, as opposed to discovery, it's like giving up or being exhausted. Emotionally, it's like maybe you're distracted, maybe there are too many choices, so you have like a confusion of the heart. For swords, intellectually, the card is the guy running away with swords, yes? So I would say second guessing, maybe like a confession, like atoning for something you thought was right at the time. That one is, again, swords are kind of tricky sometimes, but I don't think it falls quite outside, but it's one to keep an eye on. And second guessing physically, procrastination is what I would say. 8, we're going to do delay instead of movement. So creatively, I would say lost momentum on a creative or spiritual project. For emotional, fear of change. Swords, this one definitely falls outside, I think. It's the upright or reversed. It's the woman blindfolded, surrounded by swords. So she's kind of like imprisoned, and the lack of that, I would say, is freedom, or maybe even better is empowerment. So that's one to put an asterisk next to the 8 of Swords. 8 of Pentacles, I would say delay. So like laziness, lack of skill will slow you down for sure, or conversely, a rushed job is not your aim, and so it's a kind of delay in a way. 9, we're going to put dissatisfaction, as opposed to fulfillment. So creatively, we'll say creative struggle. Emotionally, emotional disappointment. Intellectually, it's the card of the person sitting up in bed with the swords on the wall. And that card to me has always meant like guilt. Something's keeping you up at night because you know you did something wrong. So the lack of that, I think, is maybe finding help, actually seeking help instead of your guilt at night kind of thing. Could also be that it's not your doing entirely or entirely within your power, so maybe like mental health issues. Dissatisfaction physically, again, I'd say reckless spending. 10 is a card in its upright position of completion, generally in this like very abundant card. So I'm going to put failure here for its reversal. Creatively, it's a breakdown. Emotionally, burnt challenges. Failure intellectually, I would say despair, I would say relapse. We also know though that the card is, excuse me, someone on the ground with swords in his back. It's a card of betrayal. So lack of betrayal might be, it's not the opposite, right? It's not like everyone's on your team, but lack of that might be that you saw it for what it was. You weren't stabbed in the back. Instead, there are lessons learned there. Failure physically, this card, the Pentacles, Ten of Pentacles, is a card that represents legacy and like family tradition. So I would say lack of those things, broken tradition, family dispute. It's the dissolution of your legacy or your hope of a legacy. So now we're moving on to our friends down here. These ones I like to think of as little friends. I don't know how else to say it, okay? So just follow me here. Think of the page as a child. I think of the knight as a peer, of the queen as a mother, like a maternal figure. Doesn't literally have to be a mother. And the father as a paternal figure. So we'll put father. So the way I think of these reversed, let me put two. The page here is like a passive energy, as is the queen, whereas the knight is an active energy, and the king also active. So think of each of these cards in their role with their kind of energy and their focus or value from the suit, and then at their worst, on their worst possible day, they had a bad day, because these are reversed meanings. So I'll show you like a child with passive energy on a bad day for wands, which is creative, I would say, or spiritual, I'd say impatient. Whereas emotional, I would say, okay, insecure. Intellectual for swords, on the other hand, I would say cynical. And for pentacles, lazy. Those are all passive energies too. Like, you're impatient, but you're just throwing a fit. You're not doing anything on it. Insecurity, obviously passive. Cynicism is a passive quality. You're judging, remotely. Lazy, passive, of course. Knight, which is, we'll say, a peer, active energy. On a bad day, and he's creative, he's reckless, he's taking risks, right? Emotionally, I would say conflict avoidant. It's like a big sibling, right? Or a peer. They do the king or queen's bidding. So like a peer on a bad day, that's like intellectual. I'd say tactless, like they're too cold in their argumentation, tactless. Physically, I would say irresponsible. Mother figure, maternal figure, passive again. So creative, I would say temperamental, or spiritual. Temperamental, it's like a matter of the heart. For cups, I would say she's needy. For swords, I would say she's cold-hearted, like too analytical. And for pentacles, I would say she's envious, right? These physical, worldly goods. She has a bad attitude towards them. So king, father, paternal figure, active energy. He's got a bad attitude and he's creative. I'd say he's demanding, like the kind of artist no one wants to be around, demanding. Emotionally, he's moody, I would say, right? Volatile in a moody way. Intellectual, say he's dishonest. And if it's pentacles, which is physical, I would say he's greedy. So that breaks down these little friends for you, I hope in a helpful way. And that is the end of our little reversal chart. I hope it helped you some. just to build a framework as we discussed. So, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're well, and I will see you very, very, very soon. Good night.